The wind screamed across the abandoned marina as rusted masts clanged like ghosts of forgotten fortunes. In the middle of that graveyard of dreams stood a woman soaked, trembling, yet unbroken. They called her foolish, a single mother chasing illusions, but when her trembling hands brushed against the decaying hull of a yacht bought for only $100, destiny shifted. Beneath layers of salt, rust, and time, something was waiting, something worth killing for. That night, Clara Hayes didn't just buy a wreck. She awakened a secret the ocean had buried for decades, and it just blinked awake. After the storm faded into a whisper, Clara Hayes stood at the edge of the dock, watching her reflection tremble across the black water. Salt wind tugged at her hair, sharp and cold, carrying the faint scent of oil and seaweed, the perfume of forgotten ships. Behind her, the coastal auction yard was already emptying, voices dissolving into laughter and gossip. They had all seen her, the desperate woman who spent her last $100 on a pile of corroded metal barely floating. To them, she was madness in motion, a story to laugh about over beer. But to Clara, it was all she had left, a final gamble against the silence her life had become. The yacht loomed before her like a corpse pulled from the deep, long, elegant once, but now half-eaten by rust. Its white paint had blistered into flakes, exposing veins of green corrosion. One name still clung faintly to its side, half erased by time: Seraphine. The word shimmered when the dying sunlight hit the hull, like something that refused to die. Clara's fingers traced it gently, and for a heartbeat, she felt warmth beneath the chill. Perhaps it was madness, or maybe hope pretending to still exist. She exhaled, breath trembling in the cold air. "Guess it's just you and me now," she whispered to the ship. Her voice barely rose above the tide, but the sound seemed to echo off the empty dock, as though the vessel was listening. Every instinct screamed that this was foolish, another bad decision from a woman who had made too many. But something about Seraphine drew her in. There was beauty beneath the decay, a grace too stubborn to fade. The same could be said of Clara herself. The sky deepened into bruised purple as she stepped onto the creaking deck. The wood groaned under her boots, sending a ripple of unease up her spine. She moved carefully, brushing aside tangled ropes and empty bottles, seeing fragments of what once was. Fine leather seats split open by salt, glass windows clouded with grime, and chrome fixtures dulled by years of neglect. Every surface told a story of a ship that had once carried laughter, champagne, and sunlight, now reduced to echoes. Her hand brushed against an old photo frame wedged beneath a broken seat, a picture of a family smiling in the sun. The faces were faded, but one figure stood out, a man in a white captain's coat, eyes proud and distant. She stared at it too long, feeling the quiet ache of a life she no longer had. Once she had a home, a husband, a rhythm to her days. But then came the layoffs, the debt, the eviction. Now all she had was this, a rusting dream moored to a dying dock. The air thickened with the scent of old oil as she stepped toward the cabin door. It was locked, but the lock gave way easily under the pressure of her wrench. The hinges screamed as it swung open, revealing a dim corridor lined with dust and shadows. Light spilled in from the dock behind her, slicing through the gloom like a blade. She hesitated on the threshold, part of her afraid the whole ship might collapse beneath her feet, and then stepped inside. The silence was heavy, layered, ancient. Each footstep echoed like a memory. She ran her hand along the wall, dust clung to her skin like ash. The cabin was a ghost of luxury. Mahogany panels cracked by heat, velvet curtains stiff with mildew, a crystal lamp lying shattered on the floor. Yet, beneath the decay, she could almost feel the pulse of what this place once was, the hum of engines, the laughter of guests, the rhythm of a life that had forgotten her kind long ago. As she reached the end of the hallway, she paused before a half-open door. Inside, moonlight filtered through a broken porthole, catching the edge of something metallic on the floor. She knelt and found an old ledger, its cover swollen with moisture, pages yellowed and brittle. Names and numbers filled the first few pages, cargo lists, routes, dates, all written in neat, confident handwriting. But at the bottom of one page, faintly scrawled in pencil, she found a single line that froze her breath. "Keep her safe. The ocean remembers." Her hand trembled as she turned the page, but the rest was blank. The ink had bled, the paper warped beyond recognition. She closed the ledger slowly, feeling a strange pull in her chest, as though this book wasn't meant to be found, yet had waited for her all the same. Outside, the waves struck the dock harder now, restless. The wind rose again, whispering through the broken rigging. Clara looked around the dark cabin, a world swallowed by time, and realized this yacht was more than a broken vessel. It was a message, a question, a warning. She stepped back onto the deck, eyes lifted to the stars. They shimmered faintly above the drifting fog, indifferent but alive. Somewhere beneath that endless black sea, secrets slept heavy, waiting. She didn't know yet that Seraphine would drag her into the heart of those secrets, or that her $100 gamble would rewrite the course of her life. She only knew that the night was growing colder, and that she was no longer afraid of the dark. As the tide rose and the wind carried whispers across the water, Clara placed her palm against the rusted railing and smiled, small, tired, but real. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't running away. She was walking straight into the storm, and as the last light disappeared beyond the horizon, the sea murmured softly against the hull of the forgotten yacht, as if acknowledging her arrival. The Seraphine had found its new keeper. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. By morning, the fog hung low over the marina like a heavy shroud. The world was muted gray water, gray sky, gray thoughts. Clara sat on the deck of Seraphine, a chipped mug of instant coffee warming her palms, watching the gulls drift across the mist. Their cries pierced the stillness, sharp and distant, echoing over water that seemed to stretch into nowhere. The city beyond the bay was waking up, engines, sirens, and life she no longer belonged to. Here, time moved slower, as if the world had forgotten this corner of the coast entirely. She exhaled, the steam from her cup mingling with her breath. "Guess it's just you and me, old girl," she whispered again. The words carried less fear now, more resignation. She had spent the night inside the cabin, curled up in an old blanket, surrounded by mildew and creaking wood, dreaming of faces she would never see again. Her son, Ethan, asleep miles away at her sister's place. His laughter still echoed in her memory, bright and full, the sound she fought to protect. Every decision she made, every risk she took, was for him. Clara rose, brushing the dust from her jeans. Sunlight tried to break through the fog, revealing the decay in full. The deck's planks were soft in places, the railing corroded, and weeds had sprouted between cracks. Yet something in her refused to see ruin. She saw potential, or maybe it was defiance. She began to work. Hours slipped by. She cleared debris, dragged away rotting rope, and gathered broken fragments into piles. Her hands grew raw, her shoulders burned, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that meant she was building again. Every clatter of metal, every echo of effort, sounded like a heartbeat returning to the ship. And with each breath, she began to feel less like a woman drowning and more like someone learning to swim again. By noon, she had uncovered the wheelhouse, its glass shattered, brass dials frozen in rust. She wiped the grime from the central gauge and smiled faintly at the engraved letters, Mare Fortuna, Fortune's Sea. Whoever had owned this vessel believed in luck. Clara wasn't sure she did anymore, but something about it stirred her curiosity. In the corner, she noticed a cracked leather satchel wedged beneath the control panel. It was stiff with age, the buckle corroded, but when she forced it open, a small cascade of papers spilled out. Maps. Charts, each marked with thin, elegant handwriting, coordinates, dates, and notes in French. One phrase repeated again and again in the margins: "Ne la laisse pas couler," do not let her sink. The words felt personal, urgent, almost alive. She traced them with her fingertip, whispering them under her breath like a secret prayer. Who had written this? A captain, a lover, someone who believed this ship was more than wood and steel. A low rumble of thunder rolled over the horizon. The sea darkened. Clara glanced up. Clouds were gathering fast, swallowing the last hint of sun. She moved quickly, tucking the papers into her duffel bag and retreating toward the cabin. The first drops of rain struck the deck as she closed the hatch behind her. Inside, the air grew damp and cold. The storm outside intensified, wind howling through the cracks like the ship itself was groaning. She lit a small lantern she had found earlier, its weak flame trembling against the drafts. The glow threw long shadows across the walls, making the cabin feel smaller, almost breathing. She huddled near the desk, the ledger still lying there, and opened it again. This time, she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint indentation beneath the page where the pencil line had read, "Keep her safe. The ocean remembers." She tilted the paper toward the lantern's light, and the shadow revealed another message scratched faintly into the board beneath words barely legible through the grime. "If found, return to V. M. V. M." The initials lingered in her mind. They matched the signature she had seen on one of the old maps. Victor Morau. The name meant nothing to her yet, but something about it stirred a chill that wasn't from the cold. Rain hammered the roof louder now. Water dripped through the seams above her head. She placed a bucket beneath the leak and watched it fill in steady rhythm, like a ticking clock counting down to something unseen. The storm felt different, not just weather, but warning. She closed her eyes, listening. Beneath the thunder, another sound pulsed faintly through the hull, a hollow, rhythmic knock, deep and metallic. At first, she thought it was just the sea striking the vessel. But when she moved closer, pressing her ear to the wall near the engine room hatch, the sound grew clearer, deliberate, echoing from within the ship itself. She froze, heart thudding. The knocking came again, slower this time, then stopped. Only the storm answered. She waited, breath shallow, then forced herself to whisper, "Old pipes, just old pipes." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. When the rain finally eased, she stepped out again, soaked in the scent of salt and lightning. The world glistened puddles on the dock, silver waves under heavy clouds, the air crackling with static. The storm had passed, but something in her had shifted. The knocking sound still echoed in her mind, haunting and hollow, like a secret heartbeat waiting to be uncovered. She stood by the railing, the wind lifting strands of wet hair from her face. The yacht no longer felt lifeless, it felt expectant, like it had chosen her for a reason. Clara looked out at the endless grey horizon and whispered softly to the sea, "I'll find out who you were." The words disappeared into the mist, but the ship seemed to hum beneath her feet, faint and deep, as if answering. She turned toward the cabin, unaware that beneath the corroded fuel tank, something gleamed faintly gold, reflecting in the dark. As the tide rose and shadows stretched across the deck, Clara felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear that had once ruled her life was fading, replaced by something else purpose. The wind died down, the water stilled, and Seraphine swayed gently, whispering secrets to the sea. And as dusk fell once more, Clara Hayes stood alone on the forgotten yacht, unaware that her life had already crossed the invisible line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Morning came softly, pale light spilling across the weathered planks of Seraphine. The storm had left the marina shrouded in mist, each mast rising like a monument to something half forgotten. Clara moved through the haze, her boots slick with dew, her breath white in the air. The world felt cleansed yet fragile, as though it might crumble if she spoke too loudly. The echoes of the night before the knocking, the storm, the whispers of something unseen still lingered behind her ribs like a pulse she couldn't quiet. She stepped onto the deck, her eyes scanning the scars the storm had left. Water pooled in the cracks, ropes tangled in strange patterns, a gull feather caught in the splintered railing. Everything looked the same, and yet not. The ship felt awake now, restless beneath her touch. She brushed her fingers against the railing, feeling the faint vibration of wind and tide, and for a fleeting moment it was as if the Seraphine was breathing again. Clara carried her duffel bag to the cabin, laying out the relics she had found: the ledger, the maps, the photo frame. The air inside was cool and still, filled with that same scent of oil and time. She knelt beside the small desk and opened one of the maps again. The coordinates written in faded ink formed routes across distant seas: Marseille, Tangier, Casablanca. All paths that seemed to lead nowhere, or perhaps everywhere. But one notation stood out from the rest, circled twice in darker ink: 47 degrees N, 3 degrees W, the edge of the Bay of Biscay. Beneath it, written in hurried French, the same phrase repeated: Le secret dort sous la mer. The secret sleeps beneath the sea. She whispered the words aloud, her voice low, the sound strange in the hollow air. The secret sleeps beneath the sea. Whatever had happened aboard Seraphine, it hadn't been ordinary. This yacht was more than a wreck, it was a grave. Clara moved to the galley next, wiping grime from the counters. The faded remnants of a once grand life clung to every surface: fine china cracked by time, a wine bottle still half full, its cork crumbling. A thin layer of salt crusted the window panes, filtering the morning light into a silver haze. The ship felt caught between two worlds, past and present, and she was now part of both. She found herself humming softly, an old lullaby she used to sing to Ethan. The melody filled the silence, tender and uncertain, echoing against the steel walls. For a moment, she could almost imagine laughter, hear voices, footsteps, life. But when she stopped humming, the quiet that followed was heavy, almost mournful. She could feel the history pressing in around her, invisible but real. As she continued cleaning, her foot caught on something wedged between the floorboards. She crouched down, prying it loose: a small, leather-bound notebook, no larger than her palm. The cover was brittle, nearly black from water damage, but inside the pages were surprisingly intact. The handwriting was delicate, looping a woman's hand. Clara began to read. June 4, the captain doesn't sleep any more. He paces the deck, even in stormlight. I hear him whisper names I don't know. The others pretend not to notice, but I see the fear in their eyes. He says the gold must never leave the ship. He says it's cursed by what it cost. Clara's pulse quickened. She turned the page. June 10, the crew wants to leave. They whisper mutiny. I told them we're too far from shore, but they don't listen anymore. Tonight, I heard gunfire below deck. The sea is black as ink. I think something terrible is coming. The last page was torn. The ink bled into indecipherable patterns of blue and brown. Clara closed the notebook slowly, her breath unsteady. Whoever had written those words had seen the beginning of the end, and she had left her fear behind like a warning. A sound broke her thoughts, a faint splash outside, followed by the creak of wood. Clara froze. The marina had been empty all morning. She stepped to the porthole and peered through the fog. Nothing. Just the shifting shapes of other abandoned vessels, swaying in the tide. Yet the feeling of being watched clung to her like static. She backed away, heart thudding, trying to reason with herself. The sea makes noises. Old ships move. Don't lose your mind now. But when she turned back toward the desk, something made her stop. On the edge of the map she had left open, droplets of water glistened fresh, still sliding down toward the paper. The porthole was sealed tight. She stared, feeling the faint chill of realization crawl up her spine. Someone or something had been close enough to touch it. The air seemed to thicken, the silence stretching. Clara swallowed hard and pressed the map flat, forcing her thoughts to focus. Logic. It had to be condensation. The ship leaked, that was all. She refused to let fear win again. She returned to the deck, needing air, needing light. The fog was thinning now, the sun breaking through in pale beams that glimmered over the wet planks. The sea had settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that hides its danger under beauty. Across the marina, the locals were starting to gather again, fishermen repairing nets, men smoking and laughing, and women haggling over crates of shrimp. Clara could feel their eyes on her, the stranger who had bought the ghost ship. One man called out, voice cutting across the distance, "You'll regret it, miss. That boat's bad luck." Everyone who owned her ended up lost. The others laughed, but his tone wasn't mocking, it was warning. Clara lifted her chin and called back, then maybe luck's due for a change. The laughter died down, replaced by murmurs. She turned away, the conversation behind her dissolving into the sound of waves slapping the dock. She didn't believe in curses, not yet, but the man's words lingered. Everyone who owned her ended up lost. She crouched near the bow, scrubbing the grime from a tarnished brass plaque. The letters emerged slowly beneath her hand. Seraphine. Marseille, 1969. She whispered the name aloud again, tasting it like a secret. Seraphine, it meant burning one. A fitting name, she thought, for something that refused to die. The day drifted into golden afternoon. Clara worked until her arms ached, until the deck began to resemble a memory of its former glory. Every stroke of her brush felt like an exorcism of time. But as she paused to catch her breath, she noticed something glinting between the floorboards near the mast, a tiny silver charm shaped like a child's shoe. She lifted it gently, brushing away salt and grime. The edges were smooth, polished by years of motion. It was delicate, almost heartbreakingly so. A child had once been here. The thought hit her harder than she expected. She imagined small feet running across the deck, laughter carried away by wind, a mother's voice calling out. Now only silence remained. She closed her hand around the charm, the metal cool against her palm. Whoever that child had been, their story was now part of hers. The sun began to sink, turning the water copper and blood red. Clara leaned against the railing, staring at the horizon, the charm still in her hand. She didn't notice the old man watching her from across the pier-weathered face, gray beard, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap. He had been standing there for some time, motionless, studying her. When she finally turned to lock up for the evening, he was gone. She stood alone on the deck once more, surrounded by the whispering sea. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and rain, and in it, something else, a trace of memory, like a voice too faint to understand. Clara closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, a strange calm settling through her exhaustion. The ship rocked gently, the world fading into dusk. Somewhere below, the hollow metal pulse returned, faint but steady, echoing in the dark as though Seraphine still had something to say. And as night settled over the harbor, Clara Hayes realized she was no longer afraid of the silence. The silence had become her companion. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The next morning arrived drenched in the scent of rain and salt. A thin veil of mist rolled across the docks, softening every outline, swallowing sound. Clara stood barefoot on the deck of Seraphine, watching sunlight shimmer faintly through the fog. The water lapped against the hull in slow rhythm, as if the sea itself was breathing beside her. The air was cold enough to bite, but she didn't care. The stillness had a strange kind of peace, a pause between storms. She had slept little. The night had been restless, haunted by dreams she couldn't name, the sound of knocking, the shimmer of something gold beneath the dark. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the ship moving under her, not rocking gently with the tide, but turning, twisting like something alive. Now, standing in the pale morning, Clara tried to shake the unease from her chest. The deck was wet beneath her feet, scattered with debris the wind had carried in. She moved methodically, cleaning again, forcing her body to stay busy. Motion was her medicine. She wiped the railings, gathered loose ropes, and polished what little brass still shone. Every scrape of the brush, every creak of wood, was a small defiance against the fear she didn't want to name. When she paused for breath, her eyes fell on the ledger lying open where she'd left it the night before. The page with the penciled message stared back at her, "Keep her safe. The ocean remembers." The words pulled at something deep in her, something she couldn't explain. She ran her thumb across the ink, tracing each letter slowly, and for the first time she wondered what kind of man wrote them and what he had been trying to protect. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the dock. She turned sharply. A fisherman stood near the edge, his weathered hands resting on a wooden crate, eyes fixed on her ship. His coat was torn, his beard thick with gray. When he noticed her watching, he tipped his hat slightly, not as a greeting, but as acknowledgement. "You really bought her," he said, voice rough with salt and years. Clara nodded cautiously. $100. She's mine now." The man's gaze drifted along the yacht's hull. "Ain't the first time someone said that. She's had many owners, none stayed long." Clara frowned. "Why?" He scratched at his beard. "Bad luck. Disappeared at sea, one by one. Some say she's cursed, others say she's haunted. All I know is, she always finds her way back here." The words sank deep, cold and heavy. Clara forced a small smile. "I don't believe in curses, just neglect." He looked at her a long moment, the corners of his eyes narrowing. "Neglect can be a curse of its own," he murmured, then turned to leave. As his footsteps faded, Clara stared after him, unease crawling through her ribs. Haunted or not, the ship had a past, and it was reaching for her. She went below deck, lantern in hand, determined to understand what she'd gotten herself into. The air inside was damp, colder than before, thick with the smell of rust and oil. Shadows hung heavy along the corridor. Her light flickered as she passed the galley, the narrow hall, and reached the small hatch leading to the lower compartments she hadn't yet explored. The latch resisted, swollen with age, but after a few strikes from her wrench, it gave way with a metallic groan. The staircase beyond descended into darkness. The lantern light revealed only glimpses, pipes, rivets, hanging wires, the skeleton of machinery long dead. She hesitated, the silence pressing against her ears. Then, gripping the lantern tighter, she started down. Her boots echoed on the metal steps, the sound deep and hollow. Each breath she took felt thick, like the air itself remembered too much. The lower level opened into what had once been an engine room, vast, silent, filled with the faint drip of condensation. The machinery was corroded, half buried under tarps and tools. The space carried a strange stillness, as if it was holding its breath. Clara stepped closer to one of the tanks, her lantern casting long, trembling shadows. She brushed her hand against the cold surface. The metal was uneven, dented, almost hollow in sound. She tapped it lightly with her wrench. Thunk, thunk. Then one tap echoed back, differently, deeper, emptier. She froze. There it was again, that hollow echo. She crouched, pressing her ear to the side of the tank. Inside, something shifted, faint, metallic. Not a liquid sound, not a slosh, but the muted scrape of something solid moving against steel. Her heart began to hammer. She pulled back quickly, breath sharp. Her rational mind tried to explain it away: air pockets, loose fittings, old tools rolling inside. But somewhere deeper, instinct whispered that wasn't it. There was something in there. The storm memory returned the knocks she'd heard that night. The sound had come from this same part of the ship. She stood there for a long time, listening, nothing but the soft groan of the hull. Finally, she stepped back, shaking her head, trying to dispel the thought. "Get a grip, Clara," she whispered under her breath. "It's just metal." But even as she said it, her hand trembled. She made her way back up to the deck, lantern light flickering behind her. The moment her head broke into sunlight, she exhaled as though she'd been underwater. The world above seemed brighter, louder gulls screaming, waves splashing, air alive. She leaned on the railing, eyes closed, letting the warmth of the day touch her face. It was foolish, she told herself, to think a ship could be haunted. But as the wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic scent from below, she couldn't shake the feeling that Seraphine was watching her, waiting for her to listen. By late afternoon, Clara sat in the cabin with her notes scattered across the desk, the maps, the ledger, the strange notebook. She copied the coordinates onto a fresh page, drawing connections, tracing the same patterns over and over until they formed a circle on the map. Her mind wandered to the initials V.M., Victor Morau. The same name the fisherman had muttered earlier, the same name signed beneath the routes. Who was he? She opened her laptop, the only remnant of her old life that still worked, and began searching. The marina's weak Wi-Fi groaned under the effort, but eventually fragments appeared. Victor Morau, French industrialist, vanished 1970s, owned several luxury vessels, including one named Seraphine. The words sent a chill through her veins. Disappeared at sea. Presumed dead. Ship never recovered. But the ship had been recovered by her. The sun dipped below the horizon, bleeding color into the clouds. The water darkened again, reflecting the first hints of night. Clara sat in silence, staring at the glowing screen, the reflection of her own face merging with the photograph of the man once tied to this vessel, tall, dignified, eyes cold. "Keep her safe, the ocean remembers." The words circled her mind again and again. Safe from what, or whom? The wind picked up, brushing against the hull in slow, deliberate waves. Somewhere deep below, that hollow echo returned, softer this time, almost rhythmic. A pulse! Clara closed the laptop, her pulse matching the beat of the sound below. The ship creaked, as if acknowledging her thoughts. She rose, standing in the middle of the dim cabin, her reflection ghosting in the cracked glass of the porthole. Outside, fog began to creep back across the water, swallowing the last trace of daylight. The marina lights flickered one by one, and in the distance, thunder murmured. The Seraphine groaned softly, the sound deep, alive. Clara placed a trembling hand on the cabin wall, feeling the faint vibration through the steel. The yacht was keeping secrets, And the sea, the endless, ancient sea, was whispering them back. As the tide swelled beneath her feet and the first raindrops began to fall, Clara Hayes knew this was no longer about chance or luck. She had awakened something that was never meant to be found. And somewhere inside that hollow tank, beneath rust and years, something shimmered faintly in the dark, waiting to be revealed. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The storm returned without warning. By dusk, the sky had turned to iron and the wind screamed through the rigging like something alive. Clara fought against it, ropes whipping against the deck, the Seraphine swaying in protest. Waves crashed against the hull, spraying cold salt that stung her eyes. She'd tied the mooring lines tighter than ever, but still, the yacht seemed determined to break free, as if the sea itself wanted to reclaim her. Inside the cabin, the air trembled with every gust. Clara slammed the hatch shut and pressed her back against it, catching her breath. The lantern flickered madly, its flame bending under invisible pressure. Shadows danced across the cracked mahogany panels, making the small space feel smaller, breathing with her. She wiped the water from her face, shivering. Then came that sound again, the thunk. It echoed from below, deep, hollow, metallic. She froze. It wasn't the storm, it wasn't the waves. It was coming from inside the ship. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. The sound came again, slower this time. Thunk. Thunk. Thunk, steady, deliberate, like something calling out. The wrench lay where she'd left it, near the hatch to the lower deck. Her eyes lingered on it before she forced her legs to move. She picked it up. Lantern in one hand, wrench in the other, she made her way down the narrow staircase into the engine room. The storm outside muffled into a dull roar. Each step creaked beneath her, echoing the sound from below. The air grew colder, thicker with the scent of oil and metal. When she reached the bottom, her breath came out in pale clouds. The lantern's light trembled across the corroded tanks and broken machinery. The shadows leaned and shifted like figures watching her move. She crouched near the largest fuel tank, the same one that had echoed the last time she'd tapped it. The dent she'd made days earlier was still visible, a small crescent scar in the steel. Her heart pounded. She lifted the wrench and struck the metal once. Thunk. The sound rippled through the room, hollow. She hit again. Thunk. But this time there was an answer, a faint metallic rattle from within. Clara stumbled back, gripping the lantern tighter. No, that's just, she whispered, trying to reason with herself. It's debris, trapped tools, nothing else. But then she heard it again, the scraping sound, like metal brushing metal. Slow, heavy, intentional. She pressed her palm against the cold surface, her heartbeat thundering against it. For a long moment, there was silence, then something shifted inside the tank. A dull slide, followed by another hollow thud. Her breath caught. She stepped back, eyes fixed on the tank, the lantern light quivering in her grip. The sound faded into stillness, but the air around her seemed to hum with electricity. She couldn't tell if it was fear or the ship itself vibrating under the storm's weight. Clara turned toward the stairs, ready to retreat, when her foot slipped on a slick patch of oil. The lantern swung from her hand, crashing against the floor, its glass shattering. Darkness swallowed her instantly. She fell to her knees, gasping, fingers scraping against the cold metal. The scent of burned oil filled her nose, acrid and choking. The only light now came from the faint glow leaking through the cracks in the deck above, dim, flickering stormlight. She could barely see, only shapes, shadows. Then another sound, a clink, soft, distinct, from inside the tank. She turned her head slowly toward it, eyes wide in the half-dark. Her pulse roared in her ears. She crawled closer, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the dent again. The surface was freezing. Beneath her palm, the echo pulsed like a heartbeat. She could feel it, not just hollow, alive. Clara scrambled back, her knees hitting a pipe. Her breath came fast and uneven, the air thick with fear. It's not possible, she whispered, her voice shaking. It's not. The storm outside cracked open with thunder. The whole ship shuddered. A sudden wave slammed the hull, and the tank reverberated like a drum, a deafening metallic roar that made her ears ring. Then silence. She crouched there for what felt like hours, the storm raging, her pulse trapped in her throat. When the thunder finally began to fade and the rain softened into a steady patter, she forced herself to stand. Her hands were slick with oil, trembling as she reached for the broken lantern. Through the gloom, something caught her eye, a faint glimmer where the lantern had struck the floor. She crawled closer, squinting. A thin crack ran along the base of the tank, small enough to miss before, but visible now under the lightning's pale flash. And inside that crack, something gleamed gold. For a second, her mind refused to believe it. It must have been light reflecting off oil, some illusion of metal, but the longer she stared, the more certain she became. It wasn't illusion, it was real. She leaned closer, heart pounding, peering into the narrow slit. The glint came again, dull, solid, unmistakable. The faint shimmer of something dense, something valuable. Her throat went dry. She stumbled back, gripping the railing for balance, her mind spinning. The gold inside the tank, the hollow sound, the messages, the ship's strange past, all of it collided into a single, staggering realization. Whatever was hidden in Seraphine's heart, it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't coincidence. Someone had put it there, someone who never came back to claim it. Lightning flashed across the cabin's porthole, and in that instant of white light, Clara saw her own reflection wide-eyed, drenched in fear and wonder. Behind her, the tank loomed like a sleeping giant, its secret sealed beneath layers of steel and time. She turned away, breathing hard, and stumbled up the stairs into the open night. Rain lashed her face, the sky a furious storm of gray and silver. She gripped the railing, staring out into the endless black horizon. Somewhere out there, she thought, was the truth and maybe danger. The sea roared back in answer, its voice deep and endless. Clara closed her eyes, the rain running cold down her cheeks. "What are you hiding?" she whispered into the storm. Below deck, in the belly of the Seraphine, the hollow echo answered once more, a slow, deliberate thunk that seemed almost aware. And as thunder rolled across the horizon, Clara Hayes understood something she couldn't unhear. The ship was not done speaking to her. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The morning after the storm broke quietly, too quietly. The sea had calmed, the air smelled of wet iron and salt, and the Seraphine sat motionless, as if holding her breath. Clara hadn't slept. She sat on the deck wrapped in a damp blanket, eyes locked on the waterline, her thoughts looping endlessly around what she had seen the night before. Gold. It wasn't possible, but she had seen it, that faint, unmistakable shimmer through the crack in the tank. She replayed the sound of the hollow echo in her head again and again, that metallic voice that had answered her touch. The more she thought about it, the less it felt like coincidence. It was as if the ship had been trying to speak all along, waiting for someone to listen. Her hands still trembled from exhaustion and disbelief. She needed answers, proof. By midday, the fog began to lift, revealing the marina's skeletal outlines. Clara tightened her coat and grabbed her phone, scrolling to a number she hadn't dialed in years. "Jack," she said when the call connected, her voice low. A pause, then a familiar chuckle worn by time. "Clara Hayes, thought you vanished. I need your help," she said. "It's about a ship." Another pause. "That's not something I expected to hear from you. It's important," she whispered. "There's something inside it." Jack exhaled slowly on the other end. "You sound shaken." "What kind of something?" "I don't know, but it's metal, heavy and hidden." Silence stretched, broken only by gulls screaming above her. Then Jack said quietly, "Where are you?" "Port Hollow Marina, Slip 27. I'll be there tomorrow morning." When the call ended, Clara's breath trembled. She stared at the phone in her palm, half relieved, half terrified. Jack had once been her anchor, a friend, a mechanic who could fix anything, but even he had limits. What would he think when he saw what she'd found? That night, the storm smell lingered long after the sky cleared. She couldn't stay still. Lantern in hand, she went below deck again, drawn by something she couldn't resist. The air in the engine room was cooler, the shadows deeper. The fuel tank loomed in silence, its dented surface reflecting her flickering light. She crouched beside it, tracing the thin crack with her fingertip. The metal was cold as bone. She tapped it gently, barely breathing. Thunk, hollow. The echo came back softer this time, like a memory instead of a voice. For a moment, she considered leaving it alone. She could walk away, sell the yacht for scrap, pretend none of this had happened. But then her eyes drifted to the small ledger lying on the bench, the page where the words were written. Keep her safe, the ocean remembers. She whispered them aloud, the sound trembling through the dark. Keep her safe. Something shifted inside her, a pull stronger than fear, older than logic. She wanted to know. She had to know. She spent hours that night gathering what little she had, a crowbar, her wrench, a hammer. The tools clattered against the floor as she laid them out. Every sound seemed to echo too loudly in the metal room. Her hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear, from anticipation. When the stormlight flashed across the horizon, she swung the wrench hard against the seam. The clang rang out sharp, vibrating through her bones, again and again. Each strike reverberated through the ship's core, the hollow echo crying out like something alive. The crack widened, leaking a thin stream of dark oil. It smelled of rust and time, and something else, faintly sweet, almost metallic. Clara's breath hitched. She crouched closer, shining the lantern into the widening split. Something caught the light, dull, square, buried under layers of grime. She scraped the edge with the wrench and froze. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't debris. It was the corner of a solid bar, gold. Her pulse thundered. She dropped the wrench, stumbling backward, staring at the tank as if it might explode. Her mind tried to rationalize plating, residue, corrosion, but no excuse could hide what her eyes had seen. The storm outside broke again, thunder rolling low and distant. It sounded like applause or warning. She backed toward the stairs, heart hammering, mind spinning. The ledger's words blazed through her memory like lightning. Keep her safe. The ocean remembers. What had this ship carried? Who had hidden it? And why did it feel like every secret inside it had teeth? When she finally emerged onto the deck, dawn was breaking. The horizon bled gold through the mist, and the Seraphine rocked gently beneath her feet, calm now, almost gentle, as if appeased. Clara stood there, drenched in sea air, her thoughts tangled between awe and terror. She knew one thing for certain: she couldn't do this alone. Tomorrow Jack would come, and together they would open the tank completely. She looked down at her oil-stained hands, trembling, then out toward the endless water. The waves glowed faintly under the first touch of sunrise, ripples of light that looked too much like gold. In that fragile, breathless moment she understood the ship had been waiting for her. And somewhere deep within its hollow heart, beneath steel and salt and silence, something waited still. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Dawn crept over the horizon like a secret unraveling. The sea lay still, reflecting the fragile blush of morning, as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened beneath its surface. But inside the Seraphine, Clara Hayes stood staring at the sealed fuel tank, her pulse steady but wild, her thoughts spinning faster than the gulls above. The night had changed her. She was no longer a woman patching a broken life together with stubbornness and will. She had crossed a line into the unknown, into something heavy and shimmering and dangerous. The gold inside that tank was real. She had seen it, felt it, dreamed of it through the restless hours before dawn. The creak of the dock broke her trance. She turned sharply. A figure approached through the morning fog, tall, broad-shouldered, his steps heavy and familiar. Jack Merrin. The years had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes still carried that same easy steadiness she remembered. He climbed aboard, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well," he muttered, scanning the deck, "you weren't kidding when you said she's a wreck." Clara smiled faintly. "You've worked on worse." He shrugged. "Maybe, but not many." His gaze softened. "You look tired." "Didn't sleep," she said. Jack nodded once, then turned his attention to the ship's guts. "Show me." She led him below deck, lantern swinging between them. The air was thick, metallic, still humming with the memory of last night's storm. Jack ran his hands along the pipes, muttering to himself in that way mechanics do when they're thinking. When they reached the fuel tank, he crouched, tapping it with his wrench. "Sounds empty," he said. Clara's voice came out a whisper. "It's not." He glanced at her. She was pale, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness but fierce. "What do you mean?" She knelt beside him and pointed to the crack at the base. "Look inside." Jack frowned but leaned closer, shining his flashlight into the narrow slit. For a moment, silence, then, "What the hell?" The beam caught the dull reflection of something unmistakable. Bars, rows of them, coated in oil, stacked tightly within the tank. His breath left him in a long, low exhale. "Clara, do you know what that is?" "I think so," she said softly. Jack whistled under his breath, voice trembling. "That's gold, solid, real gold." The word hung in the air like thunder. Clara's throat tightened. Hearing it aloud made it feel heavier, too real, too large. Jack stood, rubbing the back of his neck. "You have any idea how much that's worth?" She shook her head. "Enough to ruin me, probably." He let out a dry laugh. "You might not be wrong." For a long moment, neither spoke. The ship creaked beneath them, water lapping gently against the hull, the ocean pretending to be calm, while the world inside the cabin tilted off its axis. Jack crouched again, tapping the edges of the tank. "We'll need to cut it open carefully," he murmured. "If we rupture it too fast, we could spill fuel everywhere, or worse, damage what's inside." "Can you do it?" He hesitated. "Yeah, but Clara." He straightened, eyes darkening. "Where did this come from?" She told him everything: the ledger, the maps, the initials VM, the strange notes written in French, and the repeated phrase, "Keep her safe. The ocean remembers." Jack listened in silence, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. When she finished, he stood there for a long time, the only sound the slow rhythm of the waves. Finally, he said, "This isn't just lost treasure. Someone hid it for a reason. People don't fill fuel tanks with gold unless they're desperate or running." "Running from what?" she asked. He didn't answer. They worked in silence for hours. The sun climbed higher, the heat turning the cabin into a furnace. Jack cut carefully around the cracked seam, sparks spitting into the shadows. The smell of burning metal mixed with oil, thick and suffocating. Clara stood beside him, handing tools, her hands trembling each time the torch hissed alive. When the final layer of steel gave way, Jack stepped back. "Ready." Clara nodded. He wedged the crowbar into the split and pried. The sound was awful, a metallic groan that filled the cabin, as if the ship itself was protesting. Then, with one final heave, the panel gave way. For a heartbeat, the light caught the inside of the tank, and the world stopped. Gold, dozens of bars, stacked like bricks, coated in grime and oil but unmistakable. The dim light made them glow dull amber, like trapped sunlight waiting to breathe again. Clara couldn't speak. Her hands lifted to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes without warning. Years of struggle, of loss, of scraping by, and now this. Wealth beyond anything she had ever imagined. It didn't feel real. Jack stared too, his expression unreadable. "Jesus, Clara." "It's real," she whispered. It's really real. He nodded slowly, almost reverently. Yeah, it is. The moment hung suspended, beautiful, terrifying, impossible. The air itself felt charged, as though the seraphine had been waiting for this unveiling. Then Jack's voice broke the spell. We can't tell anyone. Clara turned to him. I wasn't planning to. Good, because if word gets out about this about you, you won't live long enough to spend a cent. The warning landed like ice in her veins. She looked back at the gold, the reflection of her trembling hands gleaming against its surface, and felt a chill crawl through her bones. Treasure? Freedom? Or curse? Jack began sealing the hatch again, muttering, We'll need to move it, hide it somewhere safe, out of sight. People talk around here. Clara nodded, her gaze drifting toward the porthole. The sky was still bright, but in the distance, a lone figure stood at the edge of the dock, motionless, watching. Her breath hitched. Jack. She whispered. He looked up. What? She pointed toward the dock. But when he turned, the figure was gone. The silence that followed was heavy, sharp as glass. Jack wiped his hands, eyes narrowing. You sure you saw someone? Yes. He nodded slowly. Then we're not alone in this. Clara looked back at the open tank, at the bars glinting faintly in the half-light, and felt the weight of their glow press against her chest. The gold wasn't just valuable, it was a beacon, and something out there had already seen the light. As the last rays of sun bled into the sea, Clara stood frozen, her reflection shimmering faintly in the gold below, a woman caught between salvation and ruin. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The air inside the Seraphine grew thick with heat and the faint metallic tang of revelation. The gold gleamed softly in the dim light, stacked and silent, like the heart of something ancient and dangerous. Clara and Jack stood there, wordless, their reflections trembling in the dull shine. Jack wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, his voice low. We need to close it up. Anyone walking by could see through the porthole. Clara nodded but didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the bars. She could almost hear them, not literally, but in her bones, a hum of possibility, of danger, of fate cracking open. Jack's voice sharpened. Clara, now. She blinked, snapped out of her trance, and helped him lower the metal panel back into place. The screech of steel grated through the quiet, echoing through the belly of the ship, like the groan of a buried secret being sealed again. When it finally settled, the sound died, leaving only the rhythm of her heartbeat. Jack exhaled. That's better. Clara sank onto a crate, rubbing her temples. It's so much, Jack, too much. Why would someone hide this here? He leaned against the wall, his shadow long and distorted in the weak lantern light. Smuggling, most likely. During the war, a lot of gold went missing, stolen, rerouted, laundered through private ships. Maybe this Victor Moore, how you mentioned, was part of that mess. Then why abandon it? Jack shrugged. Maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe he never made it back. Clara's gaze drifted toward the floor, her thoughts spinning. The ledger said, keep her safe. Maybe this gold, maybe it wasn't meant for greed. Maybe it was something else. Jack chuckled under his breath. Gold never means anything else, Clara. It's greed in solid form, always has been. She looked up at him. You don't believe that? He hesitated, then sighed. No, I just know what people become when they're near it. A silence followed, long, uneasy, thick with the unspoken history between them. Jack had seen her at her worst, years ago when her life had fallen apart. He knew how close she had come to breaking. Now, as he looked at her again, he saw something different, not the fragile woman who'd been crushed by life, but someone standing on the edge of transformation. Clara, he said finally, we have to think this through. Whatever's in that tank, it's not just money, it's a target. I know. Then you also know what happens if word gets out? She didn't answer. the weight of it pressed against her chest like a stone. The next morning the marina stirred with quiet life, fishermen shouting, boats clanking, the hum of engines and gulls. But Seraphine sat oddly still, a shadow among sunlight. Clara walked to the dock's edge, eyes scanning the water. The memory of the man from yesterday haunted her. She could still feel his stare, cold and measuring. Jack joined her, coffee steaming in his hand. "You're sure you saw someone?" "Yes, watching us, then gone." He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. "Then we need to move fast. People around here notice things. Gold attracts more than curiosity." They worked in silence the rest of the day, disguising the repair welding shut the visible seam, scrubbing the deck, cleaning traces of the cut metal. From the outside, Seraphine looked like just another forgotten relic again. But inside, beneath layers of rust and lies, slept a fortune, a secret waiting for its next breath. By noon, the sun was high and merciless. Clara leaned against the railing, sweat running down her temple. "So what do we do now?" Jack looked out across the water, his expression dark. "We hide it. Somewhere no one would think to look. Maybe the old warehouse near Dock 11, it's abandoned. I can bring some tools, rig something to move the bars." Clara's eyes widened. "Move it? You think that's safe?" Jack met her gaze. "Safer than keeping it here. You're sitting on a gold mine in plain sight." She wanted to argue, but he was right. Still, something in her hesitated. The gold belonged here, or rather, the truth behind it did. Every instinct in her screamed that taking it away would wake something dangerous. But practicality drowned instinct. "All right," she said softly. "Tomorrow night." Jack nodded. Tomorrow night. The afternoon stretched on. The marina quieted. The wind turned cool, and shadows lengthened across the water. Clara sat alone on the deck as dusk settled, staring at the horizon where the sun melted into gold, not the kind hidden in steel, but the kind no one could own. The waves glimmered with it, and she wondered how something so beautiful could ruin lives. When night fell, she went below deck to lock the cabin. The air was heavy again, thick with oil and memory. She stood before the fuel tank, lantern flickering in her hand. The steel surface reflected her faintly, a blurred, fragile silhouette. "I'll move it," she whispered. "I'll keep it safe." But as the words left her mouth, a faint sound answered, a creak, slow, deliberate. She turned, heart leaping, but saw nothing. Just the dark swallowing the corners of the room. Still, the feeling of being watched returned, sharp and cold. She took a slow breath, backing toward the stairs. The light wavered. Then, just as she reached the threshold, something scraped against metal, a faint drag from beneath the tank. She froze. The sound was small, but it was there. "Jack," she called softly, though she knew he'd already left hours ago. No answer. The scrape came again. She clutched the lantern tighter, her pulse pounding. The air felt too thin, the silence too deep. She forced herself to step closer, 1 foot, then another, until she stood beside the tank again. The sound had stopped. Her reflection in the metal seemed distorted now, moving even though she didn't. The shadows around her shifted like breath. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something behind her in the warped reflection, a figure, faint and gray, standing at the far end of the corridor. She spun around. Nothing. The ship groaned, wood and metal settling in the cool night air. Just that, just the ship. She exhaled shakily, whispering to herself, "You're tired, that's all, you're just tired." But the shadows didn't feel empty anymore. When she finally made her way up to the deck, the world outside was still and silver. Moonlight glazed the water, and fog drifted low like smoke. The whole marina slept except for one light. Far across the dock, a car idled, engine humming softly. Through the fog, she could barely make out the shape of a man sitting inside, the tip of his cigarette burning like an orange star. watching. Her breath hitched. She stepped back slowly, letting the shadows of the cabin swallow her again. The man didn't move. He just sat there, smoke curling through the night, eyes fixed on the Seraphine. Clara's heart pounded in the dark. The gold wasn't just a discovery, it was bait. Something had awakened the moment she uncovered it. And now, whatever had been waiting, had found her. As the moonlight rippled over the waves, and the car's red taillight glowed faintly through the mist, Clara understood that her life was no longer her own. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Morning broke with a strange stillness. The world around Seraphine felt quieter than usual, too quiet, as though the sea itself was listening. Clara stood at the railing, coffee untouched in her hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. The air smelled of diesel and salt. Down the dock, fishermen were already at work, their laughter faint, their boats rocking in the pale light. To them, it was just another day. To her, it was the calm before something she couldn't yet name. The image of the man in the car lingered in her mind like a shadow burned into her thoughts. The way he'd sat there in silence. The way the cigarette's glow had blinked like a warning. She hadn't slept since. Every creak of the yacht had sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind had felt like breath on her neck. When Jack returned later that morning, she was still standing there, her face pale and hollow. He took one look at her and frowned. "You didn't sleep again." "There was someone here last night," she said quietly, watching. He stiffened. "You're sure?" "Yes." She turned to face him, eyes hard. "And I think it's about the gold." Jack rubbed his jaw, thinking. "You said his car was black." She nodded. "Probably a local." He muttered, though his tone betrayed doubt. "Could be someone scouting for scrap. Could be nothing." "It didn't feel like nothing," she whispered. He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "All right. We'll move it tonight, just like we planned. Until then, we keep quiet. You do nothing, talk to no one, and stay close to the ship." She nodded slowly. But part of her wasn't satisfied with waiting. The mystery clawed at her, the gold, the ledger, the name Victor Moreau. If the man who'd hidden the treasure had died for it, then maybe the answer to what was coming next was buried in his story. When Jack left to gather supplies, Clara locked herself in the cabin with her laptop. The connection was slow, sputtering through static, but she persisted. She typed the name that had haunted her since she first read those initials, Victor Moreau. Search results appeared like fragments of Ghost's newspaper clippings, faded photos, maritime registries. She clicked through each one, her pulse quickening. Victor Moreau, French magnate and shipping tycoon, disappeared in 1972 along with his private yacht, the Seraphine. Her breath caught. Her yacht. She scrolled further. The articles painted a portrait of a man both admired and feared, a visionary with a dark reputation. He had made his fortune in maritime trade, but whispers followed him: smuggling, war, profiteering, political payoffs. The last photograph of him showed a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an expression too controlled, as if he was always calculating the next move. One headline stopped her cold. The Moreau disappearance. Scandal at sea, millions in gold missing. Her heart pounded as she clicked it open. The report was dated August 1972. It described how Moreau's yacht vanished during a voyage from Marseille to Tangier. Theories abounded: storms, piracy, mutiny, but the most chilling part was a quote from one of the surviving crewmen, found adrift days later. "We were cursed the moment we took the gold. He said it belonged to the dead, that the ocean would take it back." Clara stared at the screen, the words blurring as her breath quickened. She scrolled to the bottom of the article. There, among faded black and white photographs of the Seraphine's interior, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A picture of the main cabin, the same mahogany panels, the same velvet curtains, the same layout she stood in now. But in the corner of that photo, beside the control desk, was the same leather-bound ledger she had found. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing. On the desk beside it sat a framed photo of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, smiling at the camera, wearing a sailor's cap. Beneath it, a nameplate read, Julian Morrow. Clara's throat tightened. The small silver charm she had found days ago, the child's shoe, flashed through her mind. Could it have belonged to him? A knock on the cabin door made her jump. She slammed the laptop shut. Jack stepped inside, carrying a toolbox. "You okay?" She nodded, trying to compose herself. "Just reading about the ship's history." He raised an eyebrow. "Find anything useful?" "More than I wanted to." He set the box down and leaned against the doorway. "Well, whatever you're digging into, stop for now. We've got work tonight. I brought what we need to move the bars, pulleys, tarps, the whole deal. We'll offload in silence, no lights. The fewer people who notice, the better." Clara nodded, but her gaze drifted past him toward the porthole. The marina outside glowed in afternoon sunlight, calm and ordinary, but she couldn't shake the sense that something dark was moving beneath that calm. "Jack," she said softly, "what if this gold isn't just stolen money? What if it's evidence, something people died to hide?" He paused, studying her. "You're saying Morau's gold was cursed?" She shook her head. "No, I'm saying it was never supposed to be found." Jack let out a long breath. "Then we really are in trouble." As evening fell, Clara printed every document she could find, clippings, notes, coordinates, the crewman's testimony. She spread them out on the desk, the paper edges fluttering in the sea breeze that slipped through the open hatch. Patterns began to emerge: dates, shipments, coded routes. Every line connected the Seraphine to places torn by conflict in the early 70s. Morau hadn't been running a business, he had been running an operation. But what kind of operation hid gold in a fuel tank and left an entire crew to die? A shiver ran through her. She closed the papers, her mind reeling. The air seemed heavier now, as if the ship itself resented the truth being uncovered. From somewhere beyond the porthole came a sound, the soft crunch of footsteps on the dock. She froze. The footsteps stopped just outside. Then a shadow passed across the glass. Clara's heart thundered. Slowly she reached for the light and turned it off. The cabin sank into darkness. The footsteps continued, deliberate, slow, moving from one end of the ship to the other. She crept toward the window, barely breathing. Through the narrow crack of light between curtain and glass, she saw a man's silhouette, tall, lean, wearing a long gray coat. He paused beside the nameplate on the hull, tracing the letters with his finger. Then, without a word, he looked up directly toward a window. Clara stumbled back, her pulse racing. A knock, 3 slow, deliberate raps echoed through the cabin. She didn't move. The knocking came again, harder this time. "Miss Hayes," the voice was calm, too calm. "My name is Mr. Crane. I represent the Maritime Restoration Council. I'd like to ask you a few questions about this vessel." Clara's breath caught. "The council?" No one from any council came knocking at night. "Are you there, Miss Hayes?" His voice softened, but the edge beneath it remained. "I know you're inside." The silence stretched between them, thick as fog. Then, after a long pause, the man sighed. "We'll speak soon, I'm sure." His footsteps receded. Clara stood motionless in the dark, every nerve screaming. When the sound of the car engine faded into the night, she finally sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling. The gold, the name, the curse, they were no longer history. They were alive, reaching for her from the depths, and whoever that man was, he knew exactly what she had found. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The rain returned that night, soft at first, a whispering drizzle that turned the dark lights into hazy orbs of gold. Clara sat motionless in the cabin, the glow of her desk lamp painting her face in thin bands of light and shadow. The name still echoed in her mind. Mr. Crane, the Maritime Restoration Council. The way he'd said it, with calm precision, as if it were meant to sound harmless. But nothing about his visit felt harmless. She stared down at the printed articles scattered across the table, her fingers smudged with ink. Each headline seemed to breathe now. Tycoon vanishes at sea. Missing gold tied to smuggling. Crew claims curse. The stories felt less like history and more like a warning written decades too late. She glanced toward the porthole. The rain traced silver lines down the glass, blurring the world outside. Somewhere in that darkness, she was certain Crane's car still watched. Waiting, Jack returned just after midnight, soaked through, his jacket dripping. "Warehouse is ready," he said, voice low. "Nobody saw me. We moved the bars at dawn." Clara nodded, eyes hollow. "He came back," she murmured. Jack frowned. "Who?" "The man from last night. Said he was with the Maritime Restoration Council." Jack froze. "That's not real." She met his eyes. "You're sure? Positive? There's no such branch. Sounds like a front." "Then what does he want?" Jack's voice hardened. "The same thing we found." The rain deepened, thunder murmuring far off over the open sea. For a long while neither spoke. The yacht creaked around them, ropes moaning against the dock. The sound of water against the hull matched the pulse in Clara's chest, steady, rising, relentless. Jack knelt near the engine hatch, checking the welds they'd made over the cut fuel tank. "If he's been watching," he muttered, "then he knows something's hidden here. We'll move everything before sunrise. Quiet, fast." Clara tried to focus on his words, but her thoughts kept circling back to the history she'd uncovered. She picked up the photograph from the old article again, the boy, Julian Morrow, that smile, the sailor's cap. The child's shoe she'd found, it was his, she was sure of it now. "Jack," she said quietly, "I think this gold was meant for something else. It wasn't stolen, it was rerouted." Jack looked up, meaning what more? I wasn't hiding it for himself. He was trying to protect it. Jack's brow furrowed. Protect it from who? The world, she whispered. From people like Crane. Jack scoffed, half in disbelief, half in fear. "You're starting to sound like one of those stories in the paper." Maybe the stories were right. The storm outside flared, lightning spilling through the windows in ghostly flashes. In that instant of white light, Jack's reflection flickered beside hers, two haunted silhouettes trapped in a floating tomb. He stood, setting his jaw. "I'm finishing the weld tonight. We move the gold at first light. After that, you and I are done with this place." Clara hesitated. "And if he comes back, then he won't find anything worth taking." But as he turned away, she saw it, the flicker of fear beneath his steadiness. Hours passed. The storm eased, leaving behind a heavy stillness. Jack slept in the wheelhouse, boots still on, his body slumped in uneasy rest. Clara couldn't. The cabin was too quiet, the air too heavy. She lit a small lantern and opened the ledger again. Halfway through the pages, something new caught her eye, faint ink stains that bled through from the last few sheets. The handwriting was shakier, the strokes urgent. She turned carefully to the back page. The final entry was barely legible under the smudged ink. "July 3, I hear them. They're coming for the gold. He says it belongs to them, to the ones we couldn't save. God forgive me, the child is gone. The sea took him before I could." Her stomach tightened. She flipped the page. One last sentence waited, almost invisible. "If you find this, keep her safe. The ocean remembers." A gust of wind slammed the door open, extinguishing the lantern. Papers flew like startled birds across the cabin. Clara gasped, stumbling to her feet, her pulse pounding. She caught the door before it could tear off its hinges and shoved it shut, rain spraying across her face. The world outside was darkness and noise, but through the chaos, a shape moved on the dock, a faint outline framed by the lightning, a man standing perfectly still beneath the rain, watching the Seraphine. Her breath froze in her chest. She backed away slowly, reaching for the radio Jack had kept near the control desk. Static, dead air, the power flickered again. Another flash of lightning, and the man was closer. At the edge of the gangplank now, his coat whipped in the wind. He raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and touched the railing. "Jack," she screamed. Jack jolted awake, grabbing his flashlight. "What is it?" "There's someone outside." He ran to the hatch, but by the time he flung it open, the dock was empty again. Just rain, rippling puddles, and the hiss of wind. Jack scanned the darkness. "No one's there." "I saw him," Clara whispered. Jack locked the hatch and turned to her. "You're scaring yourself. Go rest. I'll keep watch." But she couldn't rest. Even as she lay curled on the narrow bunk, eyes open to the faint glimmer of lightning through the porthole, her mind refused to quiet. Every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps. Every creak felt like breath against her ear. When dawn finally came, it brought no peace. Jack was already awake, preparing the pulley system near the hull. Clara joined him wordlessly, helping load the first of the bars onto a top. The gold was heavier than she expected, dense, silent, unyielding. Every lift felt like lifting consequence itself. Jack grunted as he tied the ropes. "Once this is done, you forget this place ever existed." She nodded but glanced toward the dock. Her gut twisted. Something was wrong. The air was too still. Then she saw it, a faint glimmer at the corner of the pier. A reflection, binoculars. Someone was watching them again. "Jack," she hissed. He followed her gaze. His expression darkened. "Get below deck." "Jack, now, Clara." She ducked inside as he moved toward the railing, scanning the docks with measured caution. When he returned minutes later, his face was pale. "They're out there," he said. "2 men this time, they weren't hiding it." Her stomach turned cold. "They know." Jack nodded grimly. "Then we finish this tonight, before they decide to stop watching and start taking." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think they're from the council?" He hesitated, jaw tight. "If they were, they wouldn't need binoculars." The implication sank like a stone. Whoever those men were, they didn't just want to ask questions, they wanted the gold. Outside, the sea swelled with the rising wind. The sun disappeared behind bruised clouds, and the water turned dark as molten glass. Clara stood beside the sealed tank once more, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The gold beneath her feet was more than treasure now, it was a curse that had already started to wake. And somewhere beyond the fog, a gray-coated man lit another cigarette and watched the Seraphine through the smoke, smiling faintly. As the tide rose, Clara realized the world she knew was slipping beneath the surface. The past she had uncovered was no longer history, it was hunting her. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The morning broke under a bruised sky. Grey clouds pressed low against the horizon, the kind that warned of storms not yet born. The marina was quiet, unnaturally so. No laughter from the fishermen, no clatter of nets, no gulls crying above the masts. The stillness gnawed at Clara as she stood on the deck of Seraphine, staring into the mist where the water met the sky. The world felt suspended, waiting, listening. Jack hadn't said much since the night before. He worked mechanically, tightening ropes, checking the pulleys they'd set up to move the gold. His silence was heavy, the kind that carried thought too dark to voice. Clara didn't ask what he was thinking. She didn't need to. The answer was already in his eyes. Something was closing in on them. The grey sedan had been parked by the edge of the dock since dawn, its windows tinted, engine off, as still as a predator in wait. No one had come out of it, no one had moved inside, but both of them knew who it belonged to. Mr. Crane, The name alone was enough to send a quiet chill down her spine. He'd said he represented the Maritime Restoration Council, but Jack's reaction had burned that lie away. There was no council, no harmless inspection. Crane wasn't there to restore anything, he was there to reclaim something. Something buried in Seraphine's steel bones. Clara turned to Jack, her voice low. "We can't move it while he's sitting there." Jack's jaw flexed as he looked past her toward the car. "He's testing us, waiting to see if we panic. What if he already knows? Then he'll wait until nightfall," Jack said. "People don't disappear in daylight." The words sank like stones. Clara looked away, her stomach twisting. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and fuel. She ran her hand along the railing, rough, cold, pitted with rust. Beneath her touch, the ship seemed to hum again, that same faint pulse she'd come to feel whenever danger loomed. As if Seraphine could sense what was coming. By noon, the sky darkened further. Jack stayed below deck, reinforcing the welds around the tank. Clara busied herself cleaning the galley, anything to keep her mind moving. But the silence pressed against her until she couldn't bear it any more. She climbed down to where Jack worked, the hiss of the torch slicing through the tension. He didn't look up when she spoke. What if he comes aboard? Jack shut off the flame, wiped his hands, and finally met her eyes. Then we tell him nothing. He's looking for information, not confirmation. Let him talk, but don't tell him what we found. Clara nodded, though her pulse quickened. What if he doesn't believe us? Jack's gaze hardened. Then we make him. The simplicity of the answer chilled her. By late afternoon, the sound of footsteps echoed across the dock, slow, measured, deliberate. Clara froze where she stood. The air thickened. Jack moved quietly to the cabin window, peering out through the slats. It's him. Clara's throat tightened. She could see the outline, now tall, composed, moving with an unhurried grace that made her skin crawl. The gray coat hung from his shoulders like fog-given form, his hands tucked neatly behind his back as he approached. His shoes made no sound on the wet wood. When he reached the end of the dock, he stopped. For a moment, he just looked at the Seraphine, tilting his head slightly, as though admiring it. Then his voice broke the silence, smooth, polished, the kind of voice that could convince anyone it belonged to authority. "Miss Hayes," he called, his tone pleasant but hollow. "Are you aboard?" Jack turned to her. "Stay quiet." But Clara already knew that silence would only make things worse. She stepped forward, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, Crane said, smiling faintly. "I thought so. I was hoping to speak with you." Jack's whisper was sharp. "Don't let him aboard." Clara nodded, moving toward the railing. The gray-coated man stood below, his face calm and unreadable, the rain dampening his hair. His eyes, however, were sharp, the kind that never stopped assessing, never stopped calculating. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," he said, "but I wanted to clarify a few things. Your yacht, or rather, the one you purchased, is part of an ongoing maritime investigation. Ownership of this vessel may fall under certain contested rights." "Contested?" Clara echoed, keeping her tone cautious. "I bought her legally." Yes, Crane said with a polite smile. "Of course. The auction process can be messy, especially with abandoned assets. I'm simply ensuring all transitions were handled correctly. We've been tracking this vessel for some time." Jack muttered under his breath, "Bet you have." Crane's gaze flicked briefly toward the sound, quick, precise, then back to Clara. "If I might come aboard, I can show you our documentation." "I think I'd rather you didn't," Clara said. He smiled again, not offended, just patient. "Perfectly understandable. But I assure you, Miss Hayes, I mean no harm. You see, the Seraphine's previous owner was a man of complicated reputation, Victor Morrow. I believe you've come across his name." Her pulse spiked. "How would you know that?" Crane's smile didn't waver. "Because I've read the same records you have. The difference, Miss Hayes, is that I know what you haven't yet learned." Clara's hands gripped the railing. "And what's that? That this ship was carrying something when it vanished, something not meant to be found." The words hung between them like smoke. The rain began to fall harder, pattering against the deck, blurring the world around them. Jack stepped into view, his presence solid and silent beside her. "Conversation's over," he said. "You'll need to leave." Crane's eyes flicked to him, studying, then returning to Clara. "Your friend looks like he's used to fixing things. I wonder if he's found anything broken." Jack's jaw clenched. "You should go." Crane sighed softly, almost disappointed. "Very well. I'll be nearby, should you reconsider." He slipped a small white card from his coat and placed it gently on the dock rail. "Call me before the tide turns, Miss Hayes. It's always wiser to share what you've found before someone less patient comes looking." With that, he turned and walked away, his figure fading into the grey mist until he became part of it. For a long moment, the only sound was rain on metal. Jack exhaled slowly. "We need to move it tonight. No waiting." Clara nodded, staring at the white card on the dock, the rain already bleeding the ink into unreadable lines. She didn't need to see the number. She already knew the truth. Crane wasn't going to wait for their call. As dusk bled into night, Clara felt the Seraphine shift beneath her feet, the tide rising, the storm gathering again. Somewhere out there in the fog, eyes were watching, waiting for darkness to finish what daylight had started. And for the first time, she felt it, not just fear, but the sense that she was part of a story written long before she ever arrived. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Night came heavy and wet, pressing the fog low against the water, until the marina vanished into shadow. The Seraphine swayed gently in the swell, her hull whispering against the ropes, each groan of metal echoing through the stillness like a warning. Clara sat at the edge of her bunk, fully clothed, her flashlight balanced in her palm. She hadn't spoken since Crane left. Neither had Jack. Silence felt safer, as though sound itself might summon him back. Rain tapped against the glass like a patient hand. The card Crane had left still lay on the small table beside her, its ink bleeding into grey veins across the soaked paper. She turned it over and over in her hand, as if expecting it to reveal something. It didn't, just a name, Mr. Crane, and beneath it, one short phrase written in a steady, deliberate hand: "We always return for what was ours." A chill ran through her, cold enough to reach bone. Jack's voice broke the quiet from the corridor. "We're moving it now." Clara looked up. "Now? It's barely past midnight. That's the point. He'll be watching at sunrise, not before." She followed him below deck, her boots echoing in the hollow dark. The lantern light flickered over the fuel tank, their secret vault of stolen history. Jack knelt beside it, hands steady even as the shadows around him trembled. He had pried loose a section of the weld, revealing the dull glow of the gold beneath. The sight of it still made Clara's heart twist. Beauty and danger fused into one. "Once we haul a few bars out," Jack said, "we wrap them in tarp, lower them into the dinghy and row toward Dock 11. Quiet, no light, no sound. We'll stash them there until we figure out what's next." Clara nodded, though something in her gut screamed against it. What if he's waiting? Then we find out what kind of man he really is. He pried open the hatch with slow precision. The metallic scrape was deafening in the silence. When the first bar came free, it was like pulling a secret out of the earth, dense, gleaming faintly even in the dim light. Clara caught it in her hands, the weight staggering, cold, solid, unyielding. "Careful," Jack muttered. "That's not just metal, that's motive." They worked in silence, stacking 3 bars beside the hatch. Each one clanged softly when set down, the sound small but heavy with consequence. The air grew warmer, thicker, sweat and fear mingled. Clara wiped her brow, whispering, "How much do you think it's worth?" Jack didn't look up. Enough to make people like him kill for it. The thought lingered in the dark like smoke. They were halfway through pulling the fourth bar when a faint sound reached them, distant, metallic, deliberate. The squeak of a shoe on the dock, then another. Jack froze, his eyes met hers. The sound grew louder, slow, patient footsteps approaching the ship. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Jack killed the lantern, plunging them into darkness. The only light came from the faint silver bleed of the moon through the cracks in the deck. They waited. The footsteps reached the gangplank. Clara's breath caught. The faint creak of wood followed someone stepping onto the plank, moving closer. A shadow swept across the porthole. Then, silence. Jack motioned for her to stay back. He climbed the steps quietly, every movement measured, controlled. The hatch groaned as he eased it open just enough to see outside. The dock was empty. Only fog. Only rain. He stepped out slowly, scanning the stillness. His flashlight cut through the mist in narrow beams, catching nothing but raindrops. Clara followed, her nerves strung tight enough to hum. "Jack," she whispered. He turned, but before he could answer, a voice drifted from the darkness. "You shouldn't be working so late, Mr. Merrin." Clara froze. The sound came from the pier, calm, smooth, unmistakable. Crane. Jack straightened slowly, his shoulders tensing. "You've got a bad habit of sneaking around." Crane emerged from the fog like something the sea had conjured, coat slick with rain, eyes gleaming faintly beneath the brim of his hat. He smiled, that same practiced, patient smile. "Forgive me. Old habits. I find people reveal more truth when they think they're alone." Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Why are you here?" Crane's gaze flicked to her, sharp but not unkind. "Because you have something that doesn't belong to you." Jack's tone hardened. "You've got no claim on this ship or anything inside it." "Oh," Crane said softly, "I think you'll find I do." He reached into his coat, not quickly, but deliberately, and pulled out a folded document. The rain slicked across its surface. "Victor Morau entrusted certain assets to our organization decades ago, the Seraphine among them. The gold was part of a larger operation, one meant for redemption. But when greed intervened, things went badly." Clara's pulse quickened. "Redemption," Crane nodded. "The gold wasn't meant for banks or vaults, Miss Hayes. It was meant for lives, refugees, families displaced by the war, but someone took it before it reached them." "Morau," Jack muttered. "Morau," Crane agreed, eyes darkening. "And those who helped him. They all paid for their betrayal. The ocean has a way of balancing debts." He stepped closer, the wet planks groaning under his shoes. "Now, here you are holding what's left of their sin. I wonder, what will you do with it?" Clara felt his words burrow into her. She wanted to deny him, to call him a liar, but something in his tone, his calm certainty, felt truer than anything she'd heard since this nightmare began. Jack stepped between them. "You need to leave." Crane tilted his head slightly. "You think I'm threatening you. I think you're circling," Jack said, "and I don't like predators near my ship." For the first time, Crane's smile faded. The politeness slipped, revealing something colder beneath. "Careful, Mr. Merrin. Men who stand between fortune and fate tend not to stand long." The air felt electric. The rain hissed against the water like static. Then Crane did something unexpected. He turned, slowly, and walked back down the dock. "I'll give you time," he said over his shoulder. "Think wisely about what you choose to protect. Gold tends to betray its keepers." And then he vanished into the mist. Jack exhaled hard, muscles tight with fury. He's bluffing, trying to scare us. But Clara wasn't so sure. The way Crane had spoken, like he knew not just the gold's value, but its history, its curse, made her blood run cold. When Jack went below to secure the hatch again, she stayed on deck, staring into the fog until her reflection blurred in the wet steel. The sea was restless now, whispering beneath the rain. Somewhere deep within it, secrets stirred. And though Crane had disappeared, his words lingered heavy, prophetic, impossible to forget. Gold tends to betray its keepers. Clara closed her eyes, the chill of the wind threading through her hair, and realized that this wasn't about money anymore. It was about inheritance of choices, of sins, of the kind of greed that never really dies. And in that moment, as the storm gathered strength and the Seraphine swayed beneath her, she felt something shift, a quiet dread that maybe the ship wasn't cursed by the gold at all. Maybe it was cursed by the people who kept finding it. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The next dawn came restless and gray. Mist clung to the water like breath on glass, and every sound, the creak of rope, the groan of the hull, felt amplified in the silence. Clara sat on the deck of the Seraphine, her coffee cold in her hands, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Crane's face, calm, polite, certain. The words he'd left behind haunted her. Gold tends to betray its keepers. She turned the phrase over and over in her head, wondering if it was warning or prophecy. Either way, it was true. She could already feel the weight of it pressing against her soul. Jack's boots thudded against the wooden planks as he climbed up from below deck. His face was shadowed by exhaustion. "The welds are sealed again," he said quietly. "We're moving the bars tonight, before he decides to make another appearance." Clara nodded but didn't speak. Her silence worried him. She'd been drifting deeper into thought since Crane's visit, her eyes distant, her voice absent. Jack studied her for a long moment. "You're thinking about what he said?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "He knew too much, Jack. About the ship, about Morrow, about the gold. What if he wasn't lying?" Jack exhaled through his teeth. "Doesn't matter if he was. Whatever story he's selling, it ends the same with someone trying to take what we found. I don't care about curses or refugees or redemption. All I care about is keeping us alive." His words were sharp, practical, but underneath them, Clara heard something else. "Fear alive," she repeated softly. "That's not the same as right." Jack's jaw tightened. "Don't start with that."